Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the debut edition of Straight Shooter with Stephen A. Smith. I know you usually see me on the Stephen A. Smith show, but that's primarily my sports show now. When I venture beyond the world of sports, it is Straight Shooter with Stephen A. Smith, and I'm going to get right to it quick, fast, and in a hurry because I have a very, very, very special guest in studio with me as promised. He is here to promote his new book. He is a conservative talk show host. He's got a great, great podcast with millions upon millions of followers. He is an author extraordinaire. He's one of the brilliant minds in America, if not beyond, even though we tend to disagree from time to time. I'm talking about the one and only himself, Mr. Ben Shapiro. Pleasure to see you again, man. How you doing?
It's an honor for you to have me. I really appreciate
Man,
it.
please, I appreciate it, man. I got to get right to it because Lions and Scavengers, that is the title of your new book. Why that title, Ben?
So the basic idea is that human beings break down into two groups, lions and scavengers, but it really even goes beyond that. Inside each of us, we have a lion and we have a scavenger. The lion is the side of us that wants to build, that sees that institutions that are important need to be maintained, that wants to build social fabric, church, community, family, wants to go out and innovate and risk take and make our society stronger. And then there's the scavenger that's inside all of us that is envious of the people around us, envious of things other people have. And instead of channeling that towards something productive, want to tear down the entire system. And the fundamental thing that's important is that the system is to blame for my personal problems, my grievances, and therefore the system has to be absolutely destroyed. And you see this politically. This is not a right-left split. One of the things that's kind of interesting about this book in particular is that it does not make a right-left sort of pure binary comparison. There can be lions on the left, there can be scavengers on the right. It really is about a grievance-oriented mentality that has set in civilizationally in parts of the West that wants to tear away the civilization and sees the civilization as fundamentally bad, that there needs to be a revolution that destroys rather than seeking to build up, enrich, and make better.
Why did you decide to write this book now? You've been around for a while. You've been making noise for a while. You've had millions of followers for a while. Why now?
So most of my books come about because I have some sort of kind of broad idea, and then I sit down, I think about it, I research it, and then I sort of write it in a concerted period of time. This one was actually written over the course of the last 2 years or so. The inception point was right at the beginning of the book. It was November of 2023. It was about a month and a half after the October 7th attacks in Israel, the terrorist attacks by Hamas against Jews in the Gaza envelope. And I was supposed to debate at Oxford University. So I fly over to Britain, and my security team tells me I'm not allowed to stay in London, too insecure. Real security problems in London. The weekend before, 300,000 people had been out marching in favor of Hamas against Israel and all the rest. So I'm staying about an hour outside of London. Then I go over to University of Oxford, one of the great historic educational institutions of the West, 1,000 years old. And there, too, there are serious security risks. You know, people shouting anti-Western, anti-American, anti-Israel, some anti-Semitic slogans. And I thought to myself, something that is quite scary is happening, right? Something is very, very wrong. And what is it that's driving all these people together? Because one of the things that you saw was weird agglomerations of people. It wasn't just people who were interested in the Middle East, which you would get. It was, you know, for example, Queers for Palestine. It was people who, you know, had no interest in a Palestinian state in Gaza. It was people who, if there were a Palestinian state in Gaza, would be thrown off the rooftops in Gaza. So why were they marching also? Well, what do all these people have in common? And the answer is very little except a desire to tear down the Western system, the idea that the systems themselves are to blame for their problems. And so they put aside their own issues with each other to march together. And that coalition is the thing that frightens me and concerns me.
Are you of the belief that Western civilization doesn't need to be torn down?
Yes. Okay. Western civilization needs to be upheld and strengthened.
Right. And define Western civilization according to Ben Shapiro.
Sure. So Western civilization, I have a whole book a few years back called The Right Side of History, where I sort of trace the evolution of Western civilization. Basically, the classical definition of Western civilization is the tension between Jerusalem and Athens. Jerusalem being biblical values, Judeo-Christian values, and Athens being Greek reason. The idea that there's a tension between the two, and that in that interplay, you end up with things like the Renaissance, you end up with the Enlightenment, you end up with the outcome being balance of power in government and free speech and private property and free markets. And all of that is the evolutionary outgrowth of a certain level of biblical values, right? Traditional values, biblical living, combined with the application of reason to the world and to those values. And so that creates this kind of almost magical concoction that has its dark places. I mean, the history of Western civilization is not uncheckered,
Right.
but leads to the great prosperity and freedom that we have today.
But when you talk about the great prosperity and the freedom that we have today, when you think about Western civilization, although that's a clear component of it and it comes associated with it, a lot of the chaos, a lot of the problems that we seem to be having in this world, a lot of people would look at Western civilization as being an instigator of such things because, it's not as if the rules are always applicable. Sometimes we look at things and we have this mentality that anything goes, and we allow us as a society to get away with things that in other places of the world where a bit more rigidity kicks in, that would not happen. What do you say to people that would make that argument when they think about Western
So
civilization?
there's always legitimate grievances against any system. The
Okay.
question is whether the system as a whole is good and ought to be upheld, or whether it ought to be torn down to the ground. And I think that one of the key things to remember when it comes to the international order is that every agent is a motivated agent. I think that there's a tendency when we think about the world, particularly as members of the West, as Americans, we tend to think everybody's reacting to us. If somebody does something abroad, it's because of something America did. America did something, they're reacting to us. That's not actually the way that the world works. It turns out that there are many different cultures and many different peoples with their own interests.
Mhm.
And so what you really have to ask is not why bad things happen all across the world. Bad things have been happening all across the world since the foundation of the world. The real question is why anything good happens, right? The natural state of man is actually poverty. I mean, that was the state of mankind in about 1800. And then the Enlightenment happened, and private property and free markets. And suddenly you see an explosion in wealth that ends up crossing borders to the point where life expectancy jumps from the 30s to the 80s in westernized countries and jumps by decades even in non-completely westernized countries. And so, listen, everything is a mixed bag. That's just the nature of the world. But overall, Western civilization has been the greatest boon to mankind in the history of all civilization.
But you know this, and because of who you are and what you bring to the table, I mean, you understand when you're significant, when you have cachet. In the case of America, you're the superpower. You make up about 5% of the population and use about 25% of the world's resources. Some people say, I don't know how accurate that number is. Please don't hold me to that because I don't know. But I just know that I've heard that on many, many occasions. People use that as an example. And to the victor goes the spoils, they say. So you look at a place like America, it's a superpower. We're supposed to be the richest country in the world, and it's perceived as being at the expense of so many other nations.
Right, and this is the problem. I don't think that's true.
Okay.
On a fundamental level, I do not think that is true.
Okay.
The United States is not rich because we have impoverished other nations. That is
Okay.
a zero-sum view of the world. People tend to apply it to domestic economics also. They'll say that Bill Gates is rich because some guy is poor.
And I'm not saying it is. I'm
right.
saying
And
people
it-
say
and
that, but I don't know.
No. And that's the argument that I'm fighting against, because what that leads to is a desire to tear down people who are successful by blaming them for your lack of success.
Mhm.
Right? If you go back to, again, those biblical values that I was talking about, one of the first stories in the book of Genesis, and maybe the most important, is the Cain and Abel story. And the Cain and Abel story, which I think is sort of the key story for all of humanity, really, in describing human nature, is Cain and Abel. Cain decides, let's bring sacrifices to God. And so he and his brother Abel, they bring sacrifices to God, and Abel's is accepted and Cain's is rejected. And at this point, God turns to Cain and he gives him a kind of pick-me-up speech. He says, listen, your sacrifice was not accepted. You have two choices. Sin crouches at your door. You can either choose to overcome it or you can succumb to your sin. You look inside, see if there's something you could do better, or you can blame your brother and you can kill your brother. And of course, Cain goes the wrong way, kills his brother, and ends up exiled. So I think that is the real question for all of us, right? Are the problems that we see in our own life things that are solvable? One of the most enervating things that we see in the West, and I think all over the world, is this belief system like, no matter what I do, I can't get ahead. No matter what I do, my problems are insoluble. It must be somebody else's fault. Now, in some cases, it is somebody else's
Okay.
fault. Of course. And in those cases, what I would hope is that we can provide evidence of why this person is harming you, how they're harming, and then we can all fight it together.
If that's the case, why in the book do you say that the differences and the biggest reason for the divide in this country is not necessarily about red and blue, but it's about envy? Why do you say that?
Because, again, I think that this is not about red and blue at all. I think you see, again, a lot of grievance politics in the United States where people will say, just to take an example, Luigi Mangione, right,
Yes.
allegedly shoots the United Healthcare CEO on the streets of New York. And a bunch of people say, well, he deserved it because he was the United Healthcare CEO, and I don't like how the health insurance system runs, and therefore murder is okay. And it's like, well, no, if you don't like the system of healthcare, then we can have a discussion about how to change that. But the idea that cold-blooded murder is justified because you have a grievance against the healthcare system. Now you're talking about tearing down the entire system of law because you have a grievance with the healthcare system. The idea that we see in, I think, this New York mayoral race, which is that there's an affordability problem. The reason there's an affordability problem is because rich people exist. Billionaires should stop existing. If we just didn't have rich people, or if we somehow punished rich people, somehow this would make poor people richer. Whenever people talk about income inequality, I always start to curdle a little bit, because the reality is the problem is not income inequality. The problem is poor people need to be richer. Okay, the entire premise of the idea of income inequality is that rich people are rich because they're stealing from poor people. That's false. That's not true. Bill Gates did not get rich by stealing from poor people. Jeff Bezos did not get rich by stealing from poor people. That is not how you get rich. Okay. Unless you're living in a hunter-gatherer society, in which case your wealth is very much limited to how many berries and deer limbs are in your society. The way that people get rich is by innovating, risk-taking, creating better goods and services. But a politics that says your problems, your upset at the world, is not your own fault. It's the fault of the free market. It's the fault of private property. It's the fault of that billionaire over there. Let's go and tear him down. That is a very, very dangerous politics.
But I use the word opportunity as well. As a black man in America, we understand. Obviously, we don't believe everybody is racist or anything like that. And I think anytime you look at somebody who's not black and you automatically assume they're racist, you're wrong. You're wrong to think that way. But systemically, when we look at a system, particularly in America, where you're looking at a system that seems to be aimed against you, that seems to elevate a certain demographic above others. And you can look at policies, or you could look at laws, you could look at actions that are taken by people in positions of power, seemingly putting a group of people at a disadvantage compared to others. That is something that America has been guilty of from time to time throughout history.
I mean,
there's no denying that. What do you say to that?
So I think the word seems is the one that we need to get rid of there. So we need, and the reason I say that is because there are policies that we can actually name that were racist policies, right? Redlining, Jim Crow, slavery, right? I mean, these are actual evil policies, and it is everyone's obligation, moral obligation, to fight those specific policies. And one of the things that I say a lot is that specificity is where agreement happens. Right? When we get specific about what we're talking about, we can find agreement. If we're talking in broad terms, it's very difficult to find agreement. So somebody will say the system is systemic. It's systemic racism.
But you know
that's too broad.
But you know,
I need to see the system. I need to see the problem, and then you and I can fight it together.
But
because otherwise, we're just ghost hunting.
You're right. But you know better than me, Ben, that it's a challenge to engage in specificity. You know some of these politicians, they do everything they can to be vague. They spin doctor at every turn. It's the ultimate challenge to pull it off. That's one of the biggest problems that I think has frustrated so many of Americans. You've got the progressives lefts on the extreme left side. You've got MAGA right in a lot of people. I'm not talking about you, but you got some folks associated with MAGA right that can be a bit extreme, and they're operating on the fringes, and that doesn't represent most of America, but nevertheless, they're the ones making the most noise because they're the ones who wear their frustrations on their sleeve in an alarming fashion.
Well, I mean, I think it's that last part that matters. The wearing the frustration on the sleeve without an actual specific solution is a problem. And again, it's not just a
so you're saying you don't have a problem with the problem. You're saying you have a problem with with being absent of a solution.
Yes, because if you are labeling a grievance, then and you're just saying that I'm aggrieved, therefore the system is wrong. Maybe getting the diagnosis correct, right? You may have a grievance. There might be something that's wrong. Okay. When Zohar Mamdani says New York is unaffordable, he's right. Of course, New York is unaffordable, but all of his prescriptions suck, because they're all rooted in the idea that the reason New York is unaffordable is because rich people exist, or because of the free market, or because of private property. And so you just need to tear those systems down and all will be fixed. Well, I mean, that's magical thinking. And it's actually quite terrible magical thinking. People always have, there are always things that are wrong in our lives. The question is, how do we address the things that are wrong in our lives in a practical way? And I think politicians have a real stake in airing grievances and talking about the grievances because they seem empathetic when they do. You seem very empathetic. We say, listen, I totally understand your affordability problem. I feel with you the affordability problem. Therefore, give me enormous amounts of power, and I'm just going to kill all the rich people. No, the connection between A and B does not exist. And so what I'm objecting to is that entire logic. Let's say that New York is unaffordable. Okay, so how do we actually correct that? Well, we could look at the regulatory policies with regard to development and building. How long does it take to actually get a clearance to build more units in New York, for example? Right? We could look at the tax rates. We could look at how investment is done. What's the regulatory red tape? Right? These are all issues that we can all look at. And when we talk about this, it turns into a very, very reasonable discussion. Right. And for most people, it probably will turn into a reasonable discussion. If it turns into New York is unaffordable, I understand you can't afford your rent. The reason you can't afford your rent is because that guy over there with the really nice apartment is screwing you. And he's part of a shadowy system that I can't even really describe. It's a shadowy system that's out there. And behind that shadowy system are sinister men. And those sinister men are seeking to harm you. Now you're getting into a really dangerous area, because that can be used as an excuse for violence. It typically is. It can be used as an excuse to tear away systems that actually uphold the prosperity of the polity that you're seeking to govern.
Lions and Scavengers, your book, the timing of it, I brought up earlier. One would think that this is something you would write if the problem wasn't being addressed and you felt compelled to address it and to compel leadership like the White House the administration in the White House right now to do so. Are you of the mindset that this is what, are you hopeful that this is what this book accomplishes? Or do you believe that the present administration has inched or leaned towards addressing exactly what your fears are, and you're just assisting in that regard?
So, I mean, I think the administration is doing some things I agree with. They're doing some things that I disagree with. I think overall the orientation of the administration is a sort of take responsibility. With that said, I do think that there is, again, a heavy portion of politics that has arisen on the right as well that basically says you're suffering, and the reason you're suffering is because of immigration or because of the Chinese or because of shipping of jobs elsewhere. Okay, maybe that's true, but I want to see the evidence that that's true. Right? I want to see the actual evidence that you are going to be able to bring jobs back if given this amount of power. Because otherwise, what I kind of think you're doing is you are empathizing with people in order to achieve power, and then you kind of do what you want. What I'm calling for is a much more mature conversation about maybe the reason why, for example, too many people are impoverished in the United States, which I think we can all agree. Maybe the reason for that is because we actually need more individuals doing three things: graduating high school, getting married before they have babies, and getting a job. Right? And if you do those three things, you will not be permanently poor in the United States. 2% of people total in the United States who do those three things end up permanently poor in the United States. What can we do to facilitate that? Maybe the thing that we need people to do is take responsibility for when they get up in the morning, making better decisions. That's actually the thing that can make the most difference in everybody's life, right? In my life, if I make better decisions, that's going to make a hell of a lot more difference than whatever public policy Donald Trump pushes today. There's a place for public policy, but the reality is that in a country as free and as prosperous as ours, and historically speaking and by context, we're unbelievably prosperous and unbelievably free. That means that the vast majority of your life is in your hands, which should actually be a pretty activating message. It should make people feel enthusiastic about going and grasping. What I'm afraid of is an enervation that's setting in, a sort of a lassitude, a belief that no matter what I do, I can't get ahead, and therefore I need to tear things down.
But two things can be true. What you just said can be absolutely true and applicable to a large degree, but it still doesn't eradicate or negate the fact that there has been oppression in this country. There are still people being oppressed to some degree because you have the glass ceiling, per se, the proverbial glass ceiling, the curtain where you don't get to necessarily see definitively or to connect definitively what people are doing to hold others back. There are people that have been held back. Everything, even though it should be about merit, and most things may very well be about merit, we do have instances in this country where a meritocracy, the one that we aspire to exist and live under, doesn't necessarily exist. You're not denying that, are
No,
you?
of course that's true. But what I'm saying is that in the first instance, we should assume that if there's a problem, we can solve it on a personal level.
That should be your instinctual.
That should be your first move. Your first move as a person should be to say, okay, let's assume that the problem is not the system, the problem is me. And then I'm going to work as hard as I can. And then if it turns out I still can't succeed, maybe it's the system. And then I need to actually investigate what in the system needs to change in order so that I can succeed. Because now when you get to specifics, you might be able to find a solution. Where I can't get to a solution is there's somebody, I can't quite name who is obstructing me, getting in my way, creating something that I can't quite name what, that is preventing me from success. How am I supposed to solve that? There's no way. It's like you go into the doctor and you say, I hurt. And the doctor says, where? And you say, well,
I don't know.
I don't know. I hurt.
Right.
Like, okay, well, what am I supposed to do about that? There's nothing I can do about that.
That's fair. But the flip side to that is that you do have people, like for example, you say this is not about red, this is not about blue, this is not about Republicans or liberals. This is about America and what exists here and what's been problematic for us for so long. So why is it that conservatives give the impression that that's what goes on the left, but doesn't necessarily go on with them?
Well, again, I think that there is, particularly in the economic realm, a tend to zero-sum thinking that does predominate on the left more than on the right. Right? If I were to say to you, there's a politician. The politician says that you've been screwed by the system. That's the reason you're poor. We need to go after the rich. The rich are the bad guys. You're immediately going to assume that I'm talking about somebody on the left. Now, there are some people on the right who think like that, by the way, but predominantly that the sort of oppressor-oppressed matrix tends to exist more on the left. It is horseshoeing around to the right. You are seeing this on the populist right now.
Yep.
And that's why I really did not want to turn this into like a right-left conversation. I think
Right.
that certain things here are much more predominant on the left than on the right, but I do think that they exist on the right. And again, I think that sometimes they exist even internally within individuals. I think that sometimes I wake up in the morning and I'm pissed off and angry that somebody who's in my line of work is successful. And I think to myself, man, the systems are they're just screwing me. And you know what? That is not a great way to go through your life. It is a bad way to go through your life. I ought to try to discover a way that I can do better in order to succeed.
Lions and Scavengers, how do you believe liberals are going to view this book? How do you believe conservatives are going to view this book?
So I think that obviously because I'm a political conservative, conservatives are probably going to read it as though I'm critiquing only the left, and liberals may assume that I'm critiquing only the left as well. But it was interesting. I did an interview with Ezra Klein of the New York Times a couple of days ago, and Ezra, pretty rationally understood that that's not what I was talking about, right? And
I'm listening to you. I don't get that's what you're talking about either.
Right, and I think that's the thing that I would encourage people to do is actually, if you pick up the book and you read the book, what you'll realize is that, again, this is a problem that is only solvable really at an individual level. I think it's about what you teach your kids. Right? I have 4 kids, 11, 9, 5, and 2. And the thing that I'm constantly teaching my kids is they'll say, this isn't fair. And if you're a good parent, I think most of the time you say, well, life isn't fair. Like, get over it and figure out exactly how to succeed. But it's a thing that we don't say politically, right? Because politicians aren't going to get elected on that. Right. If you say my life isn't fair and my life sucks, and a politician says, well, life isn't fair.
One could easily argue Trump got elected by saying that.
Well,
I mean, they could argue. They can make that argument.
I agree with this. I mean, one of the things that President Trump said back in 2016 is he said, "I alone can fix." Right? It's a statement that I really don't like. I don't think that any president alone can fix. And what I've said, and someone's asked me, if you ran for president, which I would never do, if you ran for president, what would you campaign on? And what I said is, I would campaign on, I'm going to get everybody out of the way so you can solve your own problems. That's all I can do. I can't solve your problems for you. You can solve your problems for you. What I can do is remove the obstructions that stand in your way, that, policies that, for example, are biased against you or a group like you. Like I can get rid of that, but I can't make you succeed. I can't make a poor person rich. What I can do is create conditions where if a poor person makes good decisions, that they will get richer. Right? That's the best I can do. But no politician is going to tell you that, because if a politician says that, then it puts the onus back on you to make good decisions.
What do you say to a bunch of people, there were thousands of them, that lost their jobs because Trump got back in office and courtesy of executive orders, he decided, whether it's DEI programs or anything else, he decides that, these people don't need to be there. And ultimately they ended up losing their jobs. And they did work hard. They did have good work ethic. They were gainfully employed. They were able to pay their bills, et cetera, et cetera. And now all of that is in jeopardy. What do you say to those people?
Well, I don't think it's a moral wrong any more than it's a moral wrong for a company to fire employees, because under certain conditions, people shouldn't be employed. I mean, I agree with a lot of the cuts that President Trump made to the government. Since you and I are paying the bill for that, I guess we get to decide as the employers whether people ought to continue to be retained in those positions. But for anybody who loses their job, the next move is, okay, so how do I better my skill set, find another job, and start working again? I don't know a single person. I mean, Stephen, you deal with people who are very, very wealthy all the time. I also deal with people who are very wealthy. I don't know a single person.
Also deal with people who are very, very broke.
100%. But the point about the wealthy is, I would say the vast majority of people I know who are wealthy failed a bunch of times before they discovered the thing that made them wealthy. Like this is kind of a common, I would say a common misconception, is that people who are very successful in business were instantly successful in business. The best phrase for this is, you were an overnight success 10 years in the making. Right? The amount of trial and failure that happens in life is really, really high. And the benefit of America is that you get to try and fail repeatedly before hopefully you succeed.
But America is not what it used to be. Wouldn't you concede that?
No.
That you wouldn't concede that it's not what it used to be?
No, I think that America is in many ways better than it ever was. I mean, I think that...
Why?
Because, name a time in American history that was better for, say, Black Americans.
I can't. I'm not going to deny that. I don't think it's great right now, but I'm certainly not going to imply that this is as bad as it was in the 60s and the 50s and beyond, and before.
Even the 80s.
Obviously, to some degree, no question about that. I'm not going to make that argument.
This is sort of the problem that I have, is people kind of look back to a storied past and they tell themselves a story about it. On the right, they tend to say things like, well, if it were only like the 1950s, and if only we had the manufacturing jobs we had in the 1950s. And I kind of sit there and I say, well, really? I don't think you'd want to sit in like a Ford factory in a rivet 8 hours a day. Like, you sit in an air-conditioned office and your main physical threat is sciatica. I really don't think that's the same thing. And there tends to be a belief that your parents had it better than you did. No, your parents lived in an era where you had to go to a payphone to call your family and spend $1 a minute to do so. And now you have a magical machine in your pocket that gets you any piece of information you could ever want instantaneously, and you can order any product for cheaper than anybody in human history, and it will be at your door inside of 2 days. So that's not to say there aren't problems. There for sure are problems, but the idea that anybody on Earth or in all of human history who's airdropped into the United States wouldn't look around and go, "Holy, like this is kind of amazing," is I think gratitude is a good thing. Is what I'll say about this.
So when we look at this administration and you say, listen, America is better than it's ever been, what do you make of all the noise or the friction that has taken place in our society, out the streets of America and beyond? We've seen the National Guards in Los Angeles. We see them talking about bringing it. We've seen them in Washington, D.C. We see them talking about bringing it into Chicago. You got tariff wars all over the place. Some people would think these are very, very rough times, harsh times, very unpredictable times. And obviously that tends to scare a lot of people.
So I think that's true. We're living in very, very uncertain times.
Okay.
And I think, I'll qualify the statement saying that we're better than we've ever been. I mean, I think there are times in American history where on certain things we would score better, right?
Okay.
Community solidarity. I think there are times in American history where we'd score better. Depolarization politically, we'd score better at certain times from my lifetime. I think on race relations, we were scoring better in 2011 probably than we're scoring in 2025. There are a bunch of things that individually you could make the case we're better. Overall, in terms of prosperity and generalized freedom, you'd be hard-pressed to find, things being a lot better on those things.
But polarization can ruin it all.
Yes.
Polarization can ruin it all. So that can endanger everything. I think that's one of the reasons why we've got lions and scavengers out right now.
I agree.
Because of that.
No, I totally agree with this. The level of uncertainty, if I didn't think there was a danger to the system, I wouldn't have written the book. I think that's kind of the whole purpose of the book, is to say, what are the things that are worth preserving? And in our quest to change things, are we going to rip those things down or allow other people who really don't like the system and are driven by a certain level of envy rip those things down? The uncertainty is a massive risk for sure.
What specifically are you worried about being ripped down, torn down? What exactly are you alluding to?
Okay, so there are a few things that I name in the book. One is private property rights. I think private property is the basis of all human prosperity, economically speaking, and the desire by people like Zohar Mamdani to basically abolish private property rights in large swaths of the economy, radically dangerous. Free markets, I think, obviously go along with that. Freedom of speech and freedom of mind, a sort of desire to silence people on the other side of the aisle. It doesn't mean that everybody has to host everybody on their show or everybody has to hire everybody, but the basic idea, like you're seeing in the UK or Canada, that you say certain things and you get arrested, that scares me. I think that the application of equal justice under law has come under threat. The feeling that if you perform a crime, but you do so for quote unquote the right reason that will then let you off the hook, I think that's incredibly dangerous. I think all of those things are under significant. I think maybe the biggest thing that's under threat right now, at least on the public policy level, is the balance of powers between the branches. I think that is quickly eroding. The executive branch has far too much power in our system. And then, on sort of a community level, I think that the sense of community is disappearing. And I think to that, I attribute a large part of that to lack of attendance at church. Everybody should go to church. If you're a Christian, you should go to church. If you're a Jew, you should go to synagogue. If you're a Muslim, you should go to mosque. I think it's very, very important that people go to religious institutions, which is where you find common cause with people, like in person. Like, don't go to an online church. Like, actually go and touch grass and be with other human beings. And what you might find out is that they're not the jerk they are behind an anonymous egg emoji on Twitter.
Now, in 2016, you were not a supporter of Trump.
Correct.
In 2020, you did vote for him. In 2024, you voted for him and you campaigned for him and you gave him money.
Yes.
I mean, just the transformation that took place with Ben Shapiro. And I'm listening to the stuff that you're saying right now, and you talk about power in the executive office. I mean, you see how many executive orders this man has handed down? You see some of the decisions that he's making. I'm wondering, and then we talk about lawfare. And by the way, I'm not throwing any shade on conservatives out there who believe that they engaged in lawfare when they went after Trump with the 34 felony. They clearly was trying to keep him out of office. There's no doubt about it. And he's beaten them he beat him in 2016. He beat him in 2024. He keeps saying he beat him in 2020. We ain't going to go with that. But I will say this. In the end, he's been the dominant figure for the conservative movement since 2015. And the liberals haven't been able to do anything to thwart that at all. And they tried lawfare. Now he's turning around. And he's engaging in his own form of lawfare in some people's eyes in terms of how he's using his powers to go after his enemy. How much does that concern you?
I mean, it's concerning. I think some of the cases that he's bringing seem to be fairly well predicated. The Lisa Cook mortgage thing might be real. We still don't know about John Bolton.
Right.
But for example, suing various media outlets, not a fan. Now, again, I think this is part of a broader trend in American life. I think that the executive branch really started to overreach pretty dramatically during the Obama era. I think that increased during Biden. I think it's increased even more in Trump too. That does frighten me. I think it's a problem. As far as my evolution on Trump, the truth is that my belief system politically and in terms of my values, I don't think has changed one iota. I think that the data have changed. So in 2015, 2016, I didn't vote for either candidate. I didn't vote for Hillary. I didn't vote for Trump. I thought both of these people are not worthy of my vote. I'm not going to vote for them. My decision not to vote for Trump was rooted in a few assumptions. One of them was a character-based assumption, which I think is still largely true. One of them was based on the idea that I thought that he was going to govern in almost a center-left fashion, that he wasn't a traditional conservative. He's not a traditional conservative, but as a traditional conservative, he gave me a lot of things I liked in term one. He's very hawkish on foreign policy. I liked that. He gave me the tax structures that I liked. I liked that too. Mm-hmm. When it came to deregulation, I liked that. When it came to appointing judges to the bench, I liked that. So there were a bunch of things I didn't think I was going to get that I then got. Simultaneously, the Democratic Party decided to lose its mind and move far off to the left on pretty much every major issue socially that they could find, ranging from DEI to trans politics. And so by the time it was 2020, you had Democrats making the claim that boys could be girls. And it was like, well, okay, so Donald Trump was more conservative than I thought he would be. The Democratic Party is moving far to the left of where they even were in 2016. I'm going to vote for Trump. And so I voted for Trump in 2020. And then in 2024, there were primaries. I didn't support Donald Trump during the early stages of the primaries. He ended up being the nominee. And now I'm facing down a Democratic Party that is substantially similar to the Democratic Party of 2020, a Donald Trump that I already know from term one. And so basically it's a replay of the 2020 election, except, again, these are now the choices. And so there are important things happening internationally and domestically. And so I went out and campaigned with 6 Senate candidates and with the president.
Is that a roundabout way of a conservative such as yourself acknowledging that it wasn't really a vote for Trump, it was a vote against the Democratic Party?
I mean, I think that virtually all voting is a vote against the other side.
Okay.
I think that very few people vote, for the candidate. There are a few candidates. I think that a lot of people who voted for Trump, like just love him personally, love everything that he's doing. I would say I tend to vote for whichever is the lesser of two evils, just the way that I approach voting, because I don't have personal attachment to politicians. I know too many of them. I have a family, I have a dog, I have friends. I really don't need to be friends with the politicians that I, am covering, which is, I think, also what allows me to say things like, I don't like Trump's tariff policy. Right?
I was getting ready to ask you about Trump and his tariff policy.
Yeah, I mean, if you get too close to the politicians that you cover and you start treating them as friends, I think that's a mistake, actually. But yes, I think that's fair.
What are your issues with him and his tariff policies?
Well, I mean, I'm just not a tariff guy. I think that the tariff policies, typically, you can use tariffs for one of a few reasons. One, you can use it as a piece of leverage. That's fine. You're trying to leverage somebody to get their own tariffs lower. True. Go to zero, or you're trying to leverage some other gain from them militarily or whatever. That's fine. Then there is the idea that tariffs are in and of themselves an economic good, that they make you stronger. That's just not true. It's just false. And then there's tariffs as a sort of way of a weapon, a way of boxing in another country. That might be worthwhile with regard to China, but I don't know why we're then doing it to Japan and India and South Korea and all these other countries who are allied with the United States or neutrals who could move into our camp. And so the way that the tariffs were done, I thought, was uncalibrated. I do not think that the executive branch has the unilateral capacity to declare a national emergency on the basis of trade imbalances. That's ridiculous to me, just on a legal level. And so, if you want to do this, go through Congress. I think Congress shouldn't do it. I think it's bad economic policy. I think that the tariffs are likely to temporarily raise prices. They'll come back down as demand declines. And what you will end up with is a skewed economy in which consumers are paying less efficient companies in the United States to make products that are less good than they otherwise would get, which is misallocation of resources.
Do you believe all of this noise that he's made about using the federal government, using the National Guards in cities like Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., potentially Baltimore, Chicago, et cetera, even though the governors would say they're the chief, the commander-in-chiefs of their respective states. That's what Governor Westmore of Maryland told me when he was on a little over a week ago. Do you believe that Trump is really hawkish and doggish on that, or he's using it as a distraction because of the tariff wars, along with what's going on in Russia and Ukraine and how he hasn't been able to resolve that matter his first day in office like he promised?
So I don't think it's a distraction. I think that he does see it as a very rich political vein. I think that if he can get Democrats to say things like, well, is crime really that bad in Baltimore? That's a big win for him, right? If he can get Democrats to make the dumb argument, instead, the smart argument is the president doesn't have authority to do this, but we'll take whatever federal resources he's willing to provide. Right, like that would be a smart way to approach this. And actually, Muriel Bowser in D.C. basically did that, the mayor of D.C. I think the dumb argument that people are, well, is it really a crime emergency in Chicago? That's catnip to President Trump. It's like, are you kidding? There are 574 murders in Chicago last year. Yeah, it's a crime emergency. So, I think that the president is also, because he's on, I would say, slipshod legal footing with regard to sending the National Guard directly into Chicago to police crime. It's a violation of the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878. What he's doing now is actually smart. What he's doing is he's going to red state governors, and he's saying, I would like to deploy the National Guard to New Orleans and Shreveport, right? The governor of Louisiana is a Republican. And he's saying, I want to use the National Guard for that. And the Republican governor is going to be like, yeah, sure, go do it. Like, really, we'll take all the resources we can get. That is a brilliant political move, because that means Democrats who've been saying he's only targeting blue states. Well, no, I'm going to a red state. And saying, well, he's not going to be able to lower the crime. Well, here I am lowering the crime rates. All you guys have to do is say yes. Just say yes. Why won't you say yes? Clearly, you don't care about crime. It's very smart.
Redistricting took place in Texas. Obviously, Gavin Newsom followed suit, trying to do it in California. Your thoughts about Trump's position on that?
I mean, I'm fine with redistricting. I really don't have a
Even
problem.
in the middle of, though it goes against the grain, they usually wait every 10 years, and instead he's doing it in the middle of,
I mean, frankly, I think that these, in Texas, you are allowed. There's not, it's sort of a tradition, but it's not actually.
Yeah, I know it's allowed.
In California, it's actually a constitutional question, right? Yes. It's actually in the California Constitution every 10 years. But generally speaking, I really don't worry that much about redistricting. I think that people worry too much about this. And the reason I say that is because, number one, the Supreme Court will actually strike down kind of wild districts, these kind of salamander-shaped districts that trail all the way across the state, missing certain communities. And typically, if there is a Democratic wave, then Democrats will win Congress. And if there is a Republican wave, then Republicans will win Congress. I think that everybody gets very hot and bothered about the redistricting. Mm-hmm. The reality is that net, I think the Republicans are probably going to be in somewhere between the 2 and the 5 seat range if they pick up any seats.
Worried at all about the Republicans losing the midterms?
Yeah, of course.
How could that happen in your estimation? How could they lose the midterm?
So there are two factors, one external and one internal. The external factor is there's an economic downturn or economic stagnation. Bad economy, off your election, president isn't on the ballot. That's usually a recipe for losing seats, and it's very, very close in the House. And so, any sort of downturn, and they lose the congressional elections. The other thing is that just enthusiasm for the party in power typically is much lower than it is for the party out of power who wants some sort of check on the president. And so right now, that's what the polls are showing. They're showing very high Democratic enthusiasm, somewhere in the 75% range, somewhere in the 52, 53% range for Republicans. And so even if there are more Republicans than Democrats, if only 2/3 of them are showing up versus all of the Democrats, that's going to be a problem.
Lions and Scavengers, how worried are you that a Mamdani in New York, supported by the AOCs of the world, supported by the Bernie Sanders of the world, the Jasmine Crockett's of the world, and others, how worried are you that their cachet is going to elevate and ultimately make a lot of noise in this country?
Oh, I mean, I'm deeply worried about that. I think it is the wave of the future in the Democratic Party, unless somebody, with some sanity steps in and says, guys, you cannot take the most important financial center in the history of the world and hand it over to a 33-year-old career useless person who's never held a job and whose best idea is a free grocery store. Like, what the hell are you doing? I would love for a sane Democrat to emerge and say this to the Democrat. I want two parties that are lion parties, right? They disagree on policy, but what they actually want is a stronger American people, a stronger American system. They want robust institutions that actually defend things like the rule of law and private property and our rights. Like, that's what I want. And right now, I don't see, I see kind of like half of one, kind of, as opposed to two.
And I was getting ready to ask you, is there anybody that you see out there that you're confident is and will continue to be a lion on either side?
I think that everybody has mixtures of lion and scavenger. So, people say, is President Trump a lion? And in a lot of his behavior, sure. In some of it, not so much. Do I think that there are Democrats who I would consider to be interesting? Stephen A. Buddy,
what?
You gonna run? What's the story?
I ain't trying to do that. I mean, listen, I can't rule. Listen, the only reason I say, honestly, Ben, I'll tell this to you right now in front of your face. The only reason I say that I keep the door open and I consider it because I'm so disgusted with what I'm seeing. I'm a centrist, which I know you are not, okay? But to me, I'm the kind of person that I could be in office and that's a damn good idea. And I don't care that you're the opponent. It makes sense. It makes sense. If it's good for America, it's good for America. Do the right thing, as opposed to being a prisoner to somebody on the left that's or the right or the extreme right that's padding my wallets, and I'm just doing what's in my best interest instead of the best interest of the country. And I'm not down for that. I'm living a very good life. I have no desire to be a politician, but I do leave the door open because I'm not scared to confront corruption And I believe anybody that's not looking out for the best interest of the country, I consider them tantamount to corrupt.
Yeah,
That's
so
how I view it.
so I mean, I'll ask you because obviously you voted for the Democratic Party far more
Yes.
often than I have since my answer is zero.
Yes.
But who do you see on sort of the
I
Democratic
like
side?
I
of the aisle?
like the idea of Wes Moore, the governor of Maryland, because I believe that he's somebody that will cross the aisle to work with the other side to get things done. I like Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania. Those are my two favorites. I think that Andrew Cuomo, yeah, I think he's got to get back. First of all, he doesn't look like he's going to win New York. I think he's got to get that hawk that he was, that guy that could be a bully, a bull in the china shop that will run through you to get what he thought was in the best interest of his administration. I haven't seen that guy on this campaign. I haven't seen him. I think that because of what he's gone through, he's been a bit softer than I would like, and I'd like to see him toughen up a little bit more as we move forward. But I'm thinking those are the names that I'll come up with. But for me personally, what I would mandate is that any candidate coming from the left has to be somebody that's willing to campaign on something other than I hate Trump and I hate all things Trump and anything associated with Trump, and I'm not going for it. You have to be willing to work across the aisle because there's a bunch of Ben Shapiros out there and millions of other conservatives who can lean a little bit, not saying you would, but can lean a little bit towards the center if they find your
No,
policies
it
reasonable.
doesn't even have to be
And I
centrist
think
as long as you're making a good policy.
so
The
you're making
policy's
good
good
policy and it makes sense. I think that's important. And I don't think we can't have ideologues in the White House. I don't believe that.
I think it's good to be tethered to a good ideology that defends the things that are worth defending. But politics is the art of trying to
Yes.
reify good ideas, and that means sometimes you got to compromise.
I'm just talking about a willingness to listen.
Yep.
I'm talking about a willingness
Yeah,
to listen and
I
be
agree.
open-minded to the possibility that you might be wrong. The idea that you had, there might be something better, and you actually hear it when it's given to you, and you see it when it's presented to you. That's all I'm talking about.
I hear you.
So maybe we do agree on something. Lions and Scavengers. Congratulations on the book, man.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Congratulations on the book, the one and only Ben Shapiro, right here. Straight Shooter with Stephen A., the debut of Straight Shooter with Stephen A., the one and only Ben Shapiro in the house. I promised this man I'm going to go on this show. That might be suicide for me. I'm not ready for it. But I did promise him that I would go, ladies and gentlemen, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. Really appreciate your time. Buddy.
Thanks so
Thank
much,
you
Stephen A.
All the best.